Okay, welcome to Safe Space Finance. Today we have a brand new stream and format for you, which is we're talking to an industry expert. And today we are talking with Danielle Anderson, who's in the real estate industry. So Danielle, if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on, Mike. Yes, I'm Danielle Anderson. I'm a mortgage lender, a house hacker, a world traveler, and a real estate investor. I work for direct lending team, and we help really 80% of my business is real estate investors and people that are interested in making money off of their home, based here in Denver, Colorado.
I love that. And, I think it's such a timely thing to bring you on because the interest rates have been going wild. So like during the pandemic, it was crazy, like boom, hit the floor. People are getting 2.5%, 3%, etc. My wife and I, we were lucky to get like a sub 3% mortgage. But now things have shot back up. And I've got so many friends, both single and married friends, who they're looking to buy. But the question I think for them is, do I buy now? Or do I buy maybe in 2024 when the rates drop? What's your perspective on that? I'm so curious from a professional perspective, like what people think.
Yep. So I always like to say you buy when you're ready. So it's interesting. I obviously, for my own business, I'm marketing and like posting things online of like buy now, buy now. And I've had friends come to me and go like, why do real estate agents and mortgage lenders always say it's the good time to buy? It's like rates are down.
Always a good time.
Rates are down. It's a good time to buy. Rates are up. It's a good time to buy. And so I always like to look at data. So if you go back 50 years or 80 years and we look at home price growth for each of those years, if you're buying to hold and that monthly payment feels comfortable, it's a no-brainer that yes, any time is a good time to buy as long as you're not looking to flip in 2 years or, there might be some ups and downs. But if we look at the longevity of it, home price appreciation continues to increase, just like the price of milk, right? It's an inflation type thing. Like if we look back 30 years ago on the price of milk or the price of real estate, it's always I should have bought then, right? So people that didn't buy in the pandemic, they're like, oh, I should have bought. If they wait 3 more years, they're probably going to be saying the same things. And from what we're seeing in the market, so why we're saying it's okay to buy now, even though we're seeing, 7.5%, 8% interest rates, depending on the week. Right now you have less competition, right? So in the early pandemic, I was seeing offers at 10, 12, 15 offers on one home. So that was pulling up the price. You're, over ask. There's something called appraisal gap. So the house is listed at 600,000. If you didn't offer 675, you weren't even in the running.
Right.
So you might have, quote unquote, overpaid for that house, but you got a 2.75 interest rate. So right now we're not seeing that happen. We're seeing seller concessions. So, which means that they're helping pay for closing costs. We might see price reductions. You have the chance to ask for things to get fixed on an inspection. So if that monthly payment is comfortable, then I would say why wait? Because if rates go down, you already have the house at probably a lower price. Then you do have the opportunity to refinance to get that lower rate in the future. Yeah. If you wait until rates go down, well, 67% of all people that apply for a mortgage are actually like apply and then they're like, oh, I'm going to wait. Well, if those people come back out of the woodwork, we're going to be back into a multiple offer situation.
Yeah.
So, so
it's like
that's my take.
The sticker, that makes sense to me. Cause like, just logically, it's like, if the rates go down to 6% in 2024, it's sometime in 2024, it's like, you know that people are going to start coming out of the woodwork. Like, okay, this is the time.
Yep.
This is it. And then all of a sudden you're not buying what you see on Redfin or Zillow. You're buying a multiple above that because there's so many offers and it's so competitive and blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. So that's especially for my first time home buyers that may not have the monthly or that may not have the down payment. Right. So they, and even like 30 grand's great. Right. So you put 3% down. Well, if somebody else comes in and they've got $200,000 to put down because they're selling a home and you need down payment assistance and you might need a little bit of help on closing costs, like you're now, even though rates are down, you're like priced out of even being able to compete with those other people that have that $200,000 to put down. And we do So that brings me to another point on why we think price growth is going to continue to happen. It's like a home is like any other product.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all based on supply and demand. So there's a multitude of reasons why our supply has been low for years and it will continue to be low. And just to point some of those out, one, we have something called rate lock. So over 70% of people with mortgages right now have a rate under 4%. So
Mm.
people that would be move up buyers and sell that one home, now what we're seeing, like I actually have a client closing next week. They're a couple. She owns her
Mm-hmm.
house, he owns his house.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to COVID and prior to sub 4% rates,
Mm-hmm.
most likely both of those would have sold their house to then buy a new home together.
Right.
Because their interest rate is so low, they're both keeping that house, buying this new one together. They're both going to be cash flowing on those properties and making money from rental income because they can, because
Mm-hmm.
their mortgage payment is so low and rents have
Mm-hmm.
risen. And so they're not creating or like adding to that supply, but they're taking a home away. So that's what we call
Mm-hmm.
rate lock. So that's one reason. The other reason is that we've been underbuilt since 2000, the 2008 housing crisis. Contractors had stopped building homes and they've never built at the pace that they did prior to the 2008 housing crisis. And then on top of that, the first time home buyer age is 34. And if we go back 34 years,
Mm-hmm.
the birth rates rose during that time. So a first
Yeah.
time home buyer is the same people as that couple, is they're like taking supply, but they're not adding to that supply. And then we've got older homeowners aging in place because it's more expensive to downsize because rates are higher than just keep their
Yep.
bigger house. So
Yep.
it's like all of these
It's a
factors
confluence of
are
factors.
going to
Yeah.
influence. Mm-hmm.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I like what you said about, buy now because it's going to go up in the future. I see such a parallel in like the stock market to that. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
buy the S&P 500 today, and in 20 years you will have earned money because
Mm-hmm.
it will have appreciated no matter what, right? And for people like me, I am someone who is very deep in the stock market. Like that's sort of my main mechanism of building wealth. But I do see so much energy, especially online, on Instagram, on TikTok, so many people talking about, oh, buy rental properties, buy rental properties, buy rental properties. But I swear I don't know how to get started with that, or how to feel good about doing that. What kind of strategies are out there for people to sort of dip their toe in real estate investing?
Yeah. So there's multiple different strategies. One is buying your first primary. I feel like is it the way I like to start or have people start in, and sometimes it's unattainable. You live in Hawaii, the average home price in the area that you live is 900,000. Like then
Yeah.
it's a harder place to start. But let's just say you don't live in a high cost area. The first step is just buying your first house and living in there. I work with house hackers, which means that a house hacker is defined as somebody else that either lives with you or an Airbnb guest that you. So, for example, how I got started is I I had a shared space rental on Airbnb where I lived in the master bedroom. They lived in a downstairs room, and I would like turn sheets and turn it over, and they would literally pay my mortgage because I allowed them to share that space with me.
Right.
Not everybody's willing to do that. Now I've got a almost like a duplex, but it's a single family home that I just did a wall shut off and then have Airbnb guests enter through the basement door. They are downstairs and I turn that over. And so it helps. So I live in Denver.
Okay.
Home prices, are really $500,000 and above. You can't find anything under $500,000 for a single family home.
Right.
So it's just a way to offset your mortgage would be like the initial investment strategy. The other one, if you live in a high cost area, I work with a lot of out of state investors that find cash flowing properties in like Ohio or Tennessee, where you still can get a property under 200,000. You only have to put 25% down. Then you're making money from all, like they're paying rent and the mortgage. So essentially you don't have a monthly payment on that. Your asset of 200,000 is appreciating. So if we're comparing like the stock market versus real estate investing and why a lot of people think that it's good, and really to you, like any way you invest is fine. If you feel more comfortable in the stock market, go for it.
Yeah.
But what I like about real estate investing is technically if you invest in the stock market 25,000, that 25,000 is what grows. If you invest, let's just say it's $100,000 home, you only have to invest $25,000, but historical average is a 4.8% appreciation growth. So it's not that 25,000 that's appreciating at 4.8%. It's that asset value of 100,000, but your initial investment is only 25,000. So you're growing on that $100,000 home or that $400,000 home. Yet if it's a $400,000 home, you only put $100,000 in it to grow at 4.8%. So your return, that's why a lot of people in the real estate like that, is that you're leveraged. You're only putting in a portion. Now, not only that, are you growing on that asset? Somebody else is paying your debt, right? You have a renter in there. So that monthly payment is getting paid down by somebody other than you, and you're contributing to your principal each and every month. That is a principal contribution from that renter.
I love that. Like, I've heard some people, so like you work for direct lending, and that means you can sort of do loans for any state, right? So like if I wanted to buy a property in Tennessee, even though I don't live in Tennessee, I could work with you to do that, right?
Exactly.
When people make that move, how do people get to a place where they're comfortable, right? Because I can imagine, for me, I'm like, well, I don't know anything about Tennessee, and I don't know property managers there, and I don't know, there's so many things, so many unknowns. How do your clients typically navigate like an out-of-state purchase?
So I'm gonna put a plug in for Brick by Brick Wealth, which is an Instagram channel, and that's kind of how we met initially. Because her clients are handheld by her on figuring out markets, understanding zip codes, what zip codes are actually cash flowing versus looking at other zip codes. Now, the reason why I'm, giving her a shout out is because I do work with investors all over that don't use that program, that a lot of times they're like analysis paralysis, don't make an offer, don't do anything. It's like, oh, I don't know where to get started, versus she's got like a step-by-step plan. It's like, okay, first we're going to look up crime rates. We're going to look at Zillow and Facebook Marketplace. Like, what are rents going for? Like, and she's got like a detailed plan to help hold people's hands on this out-of-state investing. Now, she does charge a fee for that. Like, that's how she makes money.
Right, sure.
But she also prevents a lot of people from losing money by making bad decisions.
Right. So she's got like a framework and like a tool set that helps people to evaluate whether this property is going to cash flow or not. And maybe she knows people, maybe has relationships with property managers or something like that.
And if I'm not using like a Brick by Brick Wealth or a coach, really, like essentially she's a real estate coach that, holds people's hands on how to make, and she works with first time investors. Then I would be like, you don't even know where to get started on what state do I want to go? I would just like listen to a podcast like this. Like, I'm going to tell you, like, Tennessee and Ohio are usually like where I'm seeing cash flowing properties. So you start with something like that. Then you start looking up different areas in Tennessee and Ohio of what, are there hospitals around there? Are there, is there multiple industries that it's not just supported by one industry? Like for example, Detroit, Michigan is heavily in the car industry. Well, if something happens in the car industry, well, what do you think that's going to happen to your rents? Like if a car dealership shuts down, So, so then I would start there on kind of narrowing it down and just reading books and podcasts and, really doing what Casey does, just on your own, of finding all these different resources and talking to a lender. Like, I would be a great resource for somebody. Like, I work with out-of-state investors. So where am I seeing properties that are cash flowing and help dial that in?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I've often wondered when it comes to the different types of real estate investing. So like some people do the Airbnb thing. Some people do the long-term rental thing. Are there any like key differences or things that make maybe one more advantageous than the other?
So I think it's definitely personal preference. I am a short-term rental. I like short-term rentals. I like having, like, my property values are much higher than I work with clients that are looking at sub 200,000 cash flowing, like, $400 to $600 a month. My properties that I own are each over like 700,000, but but my return on investment, I love short-term rentals because one, my cleaners are in there every few days, right? So they're eyes on property. Two,
Okay.
Typically you don't, if you have a problem guest, it's only for a few days, right? It's not like, oh, I have a tenant that's like signed
No
a 12-month
permanent
lease, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Short-term rentals typically have higher returns, but it's also higher risk. So one of the biggest risky things right now in short-term rentals is regulation. So for example, in Colorado, they're looking at a tax to tax our properties that rent under 30 days. If we're rented under 30 days for more than 90 days in one calendar year, they will tax us at a commercial tax versus a residential tax, which is literally taking it from 6.75% to 30%. So you just diminished your returns. If you were tight on your returns in the get-go, like literally like my taxes in Summit County would go from like $2,000 a year to like $8,500.
Wow. Is that because they're trying to discourage short-term rentals?
So their understanding, or I think one of the misconceptions with regulations is they think that the short-term rentals are taking away from housing stock and making housing prices more expensive. I think what they're missing is the points at the beginning of the podcast of like all of these factors on what is appreciating price growth.
Right.
I'm not saying that short-term rentals don't have any impact, but like, for example, my place is in Frisco, Colorado. It's right near Breckenridge ski area. It's been a resort town for the last 50 years, right? It's always relied on not Airbnb, because Airbnb wasn't a thing 50 years ago, but you know, a bread and breakfast. It was a tourist place.
Sure.
Tourist industry is very important in these resort towns because that's also why you have restaurants or, you know, all these other employers that come in to it. So I think that's one of the key issues for legislation is thinking about is this affordable housing. And they think that taxing short-term rentals is going to help accommodate that. I would disagree with their methodology on, I don't necessarily think if you tax short-term rentals that all of a sudden home prices are going to decline and we're going to have more affordable housing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, from a regulation perspective, it can kind of hit you on both sides. Because I know in DC, there's a ton of laws protecting the long-term renter. And I've heard so many people say, once someone is like renting your property, like once they've like rented out your property for long-term rent, it is so hard to get them out, like very hard to get them out. And it would take them basically wanting to leave to get them out, which I think is also very interesting too.
So also going back to the original question, like how do you find, like those are factors that you definitely want to look into of like what states, like California, I would never invest in California, even like, and home prices are really expensive in California, but they have much more tenant friendly laws. So the state that you're talking about, like I haven't worked with anybody in DC because probably that exact factor. Now, if you're in Tennessee, it's much more easily, it's like somebody doesn't pay rent, you can evict them, you know, and it's much easier to get them out of the house. So those would be factors on where I would be considering, because you don't want us to invest in a state that is a tenant friendly state. You want a landlord friendly state. It's like, if they're not paying, I need options. Like, how do I get them out of my house?
Right. That makes sense to me. I mean, I think in general, it does feel like there's a ton to know, right? So it's like, you got it, no matter what, it feels like you can't cut corners. Like you're going to have to do research. And there's no way around that, right?
And that's what like Instagram and what it's like, oh, I do this and it's so easy. And it's like, yeah, but you also need to look at the back end of like the hard work that gets put into it or the sacrifices that people made. It's like, yes, I have some investments now, but I also lived in my basement on an air mattress while I was remodeling the basement with guests upstairs, you know, so it's like, what sacrifice are you willing to make to get you into a financial position? And I think that's with anything, whether that's investing in the stock market, you know, start small. Like maybe you don't go 5 days a week to Starbucks and you put that $25 a week where it adds up to $100 a month that, you know, then that's a sacrifice for your future self to thank you. Or going back to the original question of like, should I keep renting or should I buy now? Well, rates are high, right? We're not denying that. Rates are at 7.5% ish. Well, rates on rent is 100%, right? Not $1 of that is going to you personally. And you're just
Mm-hmm.
paying, your landlord is making money off of you, whether you're living in a house and you're paying an actual person or whether you're living in
Mm-hmm.
an apartment. So like some sacrifices on that for your financial future would be
Yeah.
maybe you don't live in downtown Denver where it's way
Yeah.
more expensive to buy. Maybe you're 30 minutes out that you get, it's $200,000 less expensive on a house. Maybe the square
Mm-hmm.
footage is a little bit less than what you originally want, but then you
Mm-hmm.
have move up equity for 5 years later to move into. And so I think what's like bottom line, the historical research shows that a homeowner is like 40 times more, has 40 times more than net worth than a renter. They're
Well, yeah,
forced.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're forced to save money each month because a portion of that monthly payment is going to them in principal. They have appreciation growth each year as they just sit in their home.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so that's where I'm like that's why I'm so passionate about like what I do is like I love helping people, especially with that first time homeowner, whether it's to house hack to make that monthly payment feel better or just get in the get-go, because once you're in, you're going to create that financial independence to be able to do what you want to do in the future.
Yeah.
Not to mention your monthly payment is set for 30 years. Like we're the
Yeah.
only
I mean,
country that allows that.
I imagine that like it's got to be a great feeling to like have a property that's cash flowing positive
Mm-hmm.
and it's appreciating year over year and someone is paying down your debt. I mean, that's the ultimate feeling, I would think. It's like it's just that leap for me that I'd have to like get over that fear, I think.
Yeah. And I think you start small. That's
Yeah.
why like a lot of my first time investors, if you're out of state, are like in Ohio, right? So like I have something under contract today on a house that's 145,000. Their initial contribution is like 30,000. So
Wow.
if you lose 30,
Okay.
like what's the worst case scenario, right? You lose that 30,000, which I'm not saying that's not a big number. Like that would suck.
Yeah.
But would $145,000, like really worst case scenario, we wouldn't even go to that losing 30,000. You would lose 6% on real estate commissions because you'd sell it a year later. Right. And 6% on 140,000, is rough,
Yeah.
roughly like 8,000 ish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of a
That makes
loss,
sense.
which on a stock market, you're losing that every day, depending on what,
Yeah.
So yeah, you start like with one and you learn the process and then you're like, oh, this worked out well. This didn't,
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Well, I know I have a few friends, and there have been a couple listeners who have been wanting to dip their toes in real estate. So if anybody is interested in connecting with you, I'll make sure to sort of pass along your info and make sure that they can connect with you.
Yeah, and they can just start following. Like I would say, an initial step is just start following people doing what they're doing. So like I'm Danielle Anderson _loans on Instagram, and just like listening to like the stories and the tips and advice and
Absolutely.
brick by brick wealth if people are looking at out of state investing on real estate. Yeah,
for sure. Well, this has been great. I have, in the spirit of like our podcast, we try to just get personal with people's finances, etc. So the question I have for you, so you have properties.
Yeah,
Do you mind
two. Yep.
You have two properties.
Two properties.
Do you mind just giving us the lowdown, like how much you make from those things, like your cash flow, and then like how much you bought them for, those kinds of things?
Sure, absolutely. So I originally started in Houston, Texas. I did sell that house. So let's just go back. I bought my first house and it was to be a primary, but I bought it with the intent in mind that I was going to have 2 long-term roommates. I bought that house for somewhere around $240,000. I kept that. I kept that for 3 years. I was charging on my 2 roommates enough to cover my mortgage. So I've never paid a mortgage.
Wow.
Enough to cover my mortgage. Then 2.5 years later, I sold it at about $340,000. So I ended up making about $100,000 in appreciation gain by the time I sold it 2.5, 3 years later.
Wow.
Then I bought my house here in Denver for $411,000 in 2016.
Okay.
And I utilized the money that I made as a down payment. So like nothing came out of my checking account, which is also the benefit of homeownership. So these like move up buys, right? So first house was 240, second house was 411, but I made money from my first house to afford a more expensive house.
Yeah.
Then I probably put in about 80,000 in a remodel.
Oh, really? Okay.
Currently today it's probably about 715,000, and that's 8 years later. So significant price appreciation gain. And my monthly payment, that's what's very amazing, is my monthly payment is $1,500 on a $715,000 house. So that is the impact of buying your own home, is like that monthly payment that I got in 2016 is still my monthly payment today. And actually I refinanced. So it came down low. Like it was 1,800 monthly payment when I bought it. When rates dropped, I refinanced. Now it's 1,500. So that's what's amazing about like buy and hold strategy is that my monthly payment has not changed. Like taxes and insurance have increased a little bit, but the largest portion is the same. Then, so since 2016, I've made over $275,000 off of my primary residence home by having short-term rental guests in the basement.
And this is through like Airbnb? Or?
Yep. All Airbnb, really. Like a little bit of VRBO, but essentially it's Airbnb.
There's since what time frame? How long?
Since 2017 when I started short-term renting here.
Okay.
So 275, like I think that's like mind-blowing of the income that you can make from your own house. Like I live here and make that money. So I mean, that's more than pays
wild.
My mortgage.
How much is it a night? Like how much is your place a night?
Yeah, so it depends on the season. So like right now it's really low, about $75 a night. Then in the summer it's about $150 a night. Then when I'm traveling, if I go on vacation, like for example for Thanksgiving, I'm renting out for 3 nights. I'm making $1,600, and I just literally like lock my stuff in one room and rent out the rest of my house.
Oh, wow.
And then like they have access to the, everything else, but just my personal stuff is locked in the closet. And
wow.
Yeah. So that like in a weekend, I make my mortgage.
Is your listing, when you list it on Airbnb, because you have to usually say it's like a room or like the whole entire residence, like how do you list it?
So I have 2 listings. I have one full house listing. And then I have one, I do call it a whole house, but it's like, it says basement apartment. So that people clearly know that I live upstairs, but it's really no different than a condo, right? That you have people that live upstairs or downstairs. Because it's a locked door. Like I have a barn door that shuts and locks. So with that money that I've made off my primary, that's where I bought a $630,000 second home that I Airbnb up in Frisco, which is now probably $850, $900. And I bought that in 2021. So it's gone up almost, over 200,000 in just 2 years. So I'm making $100,000 a year in appreciation growth. And then that one, like for the month of December. So that one's really interesting because it's seasonal. It's a ski place, right? So December, January, February, March. So like March of last year, my mortgage was $2,800 on it. And March of last year, I made $15,000 in rental income.
Wow.
So, and then December already, I have booked about $7,500 in rental income. Then I split that. So there's 3 investment kind of types, like 1, primary residence, house hacker. 2, you've got your short-term rentals, like regular. Then you've got what's called midterm rentals, which is like Furnished Finders, or not a year-long lease, but like a midterm type lease. And then you've got long-term leases. So I midterm rent that for 6 months during the off season. So my mortgage is $2,800. I charge $3,900. So I'm making $1,100 cash flow. Plus I'm paying myself about $800 a month towards my mortgage. So it's about $1,900 on the off season. Then I stopped doing the midterm rental during peak season so that I can reap the benefits of all the skiers coming to Colorado to take advantage of our ski resorts.
That's amazing. Is it difficult to find that midterm renter? Like, or is there like a niche?
So
like,
there's so there's a housing there's not enough housing in Summit County. I post mine on Zillow Rentals. Then I post it on Furnished Finders, which is mostly tailored to like traveling nurses. And then Craigslist.
Oh, wow.
and like there's like Facebook groups that are looking for housing. So I post it all in there, and then I always Zoom with people before I accept. Like I had like probably 15 applicants for the home, so it was very easy in that market. But you have to also know your market, right?
Yeah.
Like, is there a housing shortage? It's going to be easier to find tenants if there's a housing shortage. So I have not had any issues finding a midterm rental, but the issues with midterm rentals is if you're only able to do 30 days, like what if you have a 15-day gap in between, but your municipality doesn't allow for rentals under 30 days? Like you're just out that money, right? Like,
yeah. Wow. Well,
So-
Danielle, you are incredibly fascinating. I admire you, and I need to get on your level. I'm kind of like in awe by the amount of money you're making, you know, on these properties. It sounds, you know,
and
it sounds ideal.
So yes, but I do want to point out that I bought, both of my interest rates are under 3%. So my cash flow up in that area. So, and I bought before prices increased by 40%. I wish, like, I regret not buying more properties when rates were low, because I'm also a very conservative investor, right? I only have 2 properties, but both my properties combined are about 1.5 million. And with mortgages under about 600,000, you know, so I'm cash flowing very, very good. If I was to buy if my home is about 850,000 up in Frisco right now at an 8% interest rate, your mortgage payment is going to be more than 7,000 if you don't put a lot down, you know, so you can't get that cash flow anymore. Now that's where a lot of people are finding success still in those smaller markets where they're cash flowing like $300 a month or $200 a month. Now I'm not saying it's a bad time to buy at all. I'm just saying that that is not as
lucrative.
You have to find, like, you're finding deal. Like I just saw somebody go under contract for $30,000 under. Like you're getting your money on different ways now than just that low interest rate, low payment cash flowing. So I just want to like caveat
so
that.
It's not as simple. It's not as simple and straightforward as it used to be.
It's not as simple and straightforward. There are still deals to be found, but you have to do the due diligence to make sure that deal is out there. And I would say where the deal is if people have not bought their primary residence yet, that is going to be the number one deal. So if you're paying $2,000 in rent right now and buying a home is about $3,500, you're still not going to regret that extra $1,500, especially if you're house hacking like I'm talking about. Like that is the deal, because home prices are going to continue to climb, and you're going to get, like, a lot of people are going to get priced out and then not build that well. So
okay.
Hope that helps.
Well, Danielle, this has been amazing and fascinating. I really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you so much for being our first expert guest.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Mike. Take care.
Absolutely.